This week in the Regency, it's fashions for February again, but this time we're looking at Ackermann's Repository of the Arts. And this week is it's a really interesting one, I think. I want to show you an image, one of the two plates, and not just give you the description, but decode it in terms of how a Regency lady or gentleman, men read this magazine as well. It was very, very full of all sorts of things: architecture, art, politics, poetry, all kinds of stuff. So it had a very wide, broad readership amongst the upper classes. And I just thought it would be interesting to look at this image and take each bit and decode it in terms of how a contemporary readership would have seen this image. So what is it? Well, it's this. Now, the first thing I want you to remember is that fashions for February come out in January. So to give people time to make the frock and be at the right time of fashion, which means that this image would have been put together probably in late December 1813. And in December 1813, there was a very large battle against Napoloeon in which the British were involved, and quite a few people died. And so let's see what the magazine has to say about this outfit. It's a morning dress. So a morning dress is something that one wears either to go out to visit one's friends or to shop, or one wears to stay in and receive people, morning visitors. Remembering that morning for the upper crust was often late, much later than we think of as morning, because if you stay up until 3 o'clock in the morning at a ball, you don't get up at the crack of dawn. It's very late morning or early afternoon typically is when morning calls were made. Remembering that luncheon wasn't really a thing at this point. You had an early dinner and you might have a snack and luncheon. So a morning dress, a round robe of plain jacquardette muslin. Remember, that's the smooth muslin with Spencer bodice. That is one that does up in the middle, and rounded falling collar edged with lace or needlework, the same ornamenting the bottom of the dress. A loose robe pelisse of India muslin, thrown quite open in the front, trimmed entirely round with a full gathered border of muslin or lace, the back confined at the bottom with a lemon-coloured ribbon, brought round the waist and tied in bows and ends at the front. The Flushing mob cap. Flushing was a suburb or a town at that point in London, or near London. So presumably it was a style from there, composed entirely of lace, ornamented with lemon-coloured ribbon, which also confines it under the chin. A small rosary and cross of amber twisted around the wrist, and a brooch of the same confining the dress at the throat. Slippers and gloves of lemon-coloured kid. So let's decode it. Okay, it's very clear that this is not a going out frock or outfit. It's very light. Remember, we're in the middle of winter. It has a lace cap, which you could wear underneath a bonnet, and certainly people did. The fact that it has a cap means it's not a debutante's outfit. It's an outfit for older women, married women, possibly mothers. It's quite modest. It comes right up to the throat. So it's not a courting dress. It's not something you're wearing out to influence, to look good necessarily. It's very light. Lace and Indian muslin, jacquardette muslin, they're very light. It's not a going out dress in any way, shape or form. This is a dress to stay home in, to wear at home. Then we look at the posture of this lady, and in particular the rosary. Now, I had always thought of rosary as a Catholic thing, and of course in England at this point, in Britain, Catholicism was very much a minority religion, and it was very heavily controlled. You could not, for example, get married in a Catholic church. It wasn't legal to be married in a Catholic church. You had to be married in an Anglican church, unless you were Jewish or a Quaker. So whether you were Catholic or Methodist didn't matter. You still had to get married in an Anglican church. So there were all sorts of restrictions placed on Catholics. So I was initially surprised to see the rosary, but apparently there is a high church Anglican tradition of the rosary. What do we learn then? Because the rosary is there. It's quite unusual. I've only found one other fashion plate with it, and that was in 1812. To me, this is a woman who is praying for people she cares about. Look at her slumped shoulders, her eyes raised to heaven. That's quite significant, I think. And so I think the contemporary reader would have looked at this image and seen a woman praying for the people that she loved. Son, husband, brother, father, who might be in France fighting Napoleon. And I think I find it a very affecting image. But if you were somebody who had people there, how much more would you empathize with this image? And the reason I think it's clearly about that is partly because it's white, and white was traditionally an evening dress color. And it was also a half mourning color. So black was the initial color that one wore in mourning, but after 6 months or 12 months, depending on how close the relationship was, you could move into half mourning, and that was white and lavender and grey. So this could easily be seen as a mourning outfit, even if later. And wearing white at home was acceptable also, even in the early stages. So this is a woman praying for the souls or the safety of the people that she cares about. And I think it's interesting, I've been talking about this linkage between what was happening in the military and what was happening in fashion, but this goes a step further towards acknowledging the pain and heartache that these wars were causing. The other thing I think is interesting is that Ackermann's also put in patterns for embroidery. And this is a pattern for white work. So this is white. You could have colors, I guess, but it was intended for white work, where you have white embroidery on a very fine white fabric like lawn. And they publish these kinds of patterns quite frequently. And so it's obvious that ladies were expected to embroider at least some of their own gowns, although possibly they handed it off to their maid. Who knows? But this was something that you could trace, and because it's quite dark, the image is quite dark, and you'd put the very fine fabric over the top of it and trace it with a pencil so that you could embroider the fabric. That's this week in the Regency. I'm Elizabeth Layden. I'll see you next week in the Regency.